It was a quiet night, or so it seemed. At Santa Clara Hospital, the night shift was proceeding as usual, with nurses and doctors walking through the silent corridors. Laura, one of the most experienced nurses, was used to these long nights. But something about this night felt different, almost like a tension in the air. Suddenly, a loud bang made the windows vibrate. What sounded like the shattering of a door echoed through the main lobby. She ran to see what was happening, and as she turned the corner, she froze. A lion, imposing and terrifying, stood in the middle of the hospital's lobby. His eyes, a deep yellow, gleamed under the cold lights of the place. Chaos quickly erupted. People screamed, doctors fled, and patients tried to hide in any way they could. But Laura, strangely enough, didn't feel fear. She felt curiosity. The lion, despite his colossal and threatening figure, didn't seem intent on attacking. He was carrying something in his mouth. Laura squinted and realized it was a cub. But it wasn't a lion cub, it was from another species, something she couldn't immediately identify. It seemed fragile, scared. Her instincts took over, and without thinking much, Laura slowly began to approach. "It's okay, everything's fine," she murmured, almost as if the lion could understand her. And in some way he seemed to. His eyes, locked on her, showed a mixture of exhaustion and urgency. While Laura was trying to get closer to the lion, the chaos outside only intensified. People were running in panic through the corridors, and the sound of sirens outside echoed through the hospital. Eduardo, the head of security, was on the phone with the authorities, trying to explain the impossible situation. "Yes, it's a lion! Inside the hospital! We need urgent backup!" His voice was filled with tension. Inside the room, however, Laura remained focused. Her eyes were fixed on the lion, but, contrary to what many might imagine, she wasn't afraid. She felt a strange connection to the animal, something deeper than the simple fear of being in the presence of a predator. The lion, in turn, didn't seem aggressive, despite the chaotic situation. He was agitated, pacing back and forth, but his eyes reflected something beyond the instinct to hunt. It was as if he was searching for something, or someone. Suddenly, Laura noticed something hanging from the lion's teeth. A small cub. It wasn't a lion cub, but another, smaller animal that seemed fragile and vulnerable. The cub was trembling, and Laura, with her experience in handling risky situations, knew that the lion was protecting the little creature. Eduardo, watching the scene through the door's window, shouted, "Laura, what are you doing?" The fear in his voice was obvious. But Laura, strangely calm, responded, "He doesn't want to hurt us, Eduardo. He's here because of the cub." Every step she took was calculated, moving slowly so as not to startle the lion, while the animal remained watchful but didn't attack. He seemed to trust her. As Laura cautiously approached, the hospital outside remained in chaos. Eduardo, still nervous, tried to organize the security team, but the sense of helplessness overwhelmed everyone. "We need more tranquilizers, more equipment," he muttered to himself, knowing it wouldn't be enough against an adult lion. Inside the room, Laura was just a few steps away from the lion. She slowly extended her hand, avoiding any sudden movements, trying to gain the animal's trust. "Easy, big guy. I just want to help," she whispered, keeping her voice firm yet gentle. The lion watched her with its deep eyes, full of vigilance, and at the same time, a kind of understanding. Isabela knew he could attack at any moment, but something inside her told her he wouldn't. Suddenly, the lion let out a low growl and dropped the cub onto the floor. It was an exotic creature, small and fragile, something Laura had never seen before. "What is this?" she wondered aloud. The small animal was trembling, appearing injured and extremely frightened. Laura crouched down, keeping her eyes on the lion as she approached the cub. When she reached out to pick up the little creature, the lion took a step forward, growling softly. But then, as if recognizing Laura's intentions, He stopped and just watched. She carefully picked up the cub, noticing its small claws and thin fur up close. "It's okay now," she whispered, trying to calm the little creature, while the lion seemed to relax, still watchful, but without showing any aggression. Laura was surprised at how the lion allowed her to care for the cub, almost as if he knew she would help. Outside, Eduardo was trying to coordinate a partial evacuation of the hospital, keeping the other patients safe. "This doesn't make any sense," he thought. "How did this lion end up here? And why hasn't it attacked anyone yet?" But inside the room, the mystery only deepened. The lion seemed to have a mission, and Isabela was beginning to understand that somehow she was part of it. Laura took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the cub in her hands. The small animal trembled, its eyes full of fear and pain. She knew she had to act quickly, but the lion was watching her, as if expecting something more. Eduardo outside was desperate. He was trying to control the situation, but the chaos only intensified. "We need to get Isabela out of there," he repeated, but without the courage to storm into the room. Back inside, Laura slowly knelt, showing she wasn't a threat. "It's okay. I just want to help your cub," she murmured, as the lion's eyes followed her every move. There was tension in the air, but something held the animal back from attacking. It was as if he trusted her in some instinctive way. Suddenly, the lion took 2 steps back, allowing Laura to approach even further. She knew this was her chance. With the cub in her arms, she slowly exited the room, heart racing, without taking her eyes off the lion. Inside the room, Laura remained silent, holding the cub protectively in her arms. The lion, though exhausted, kept his eyes fixed on her, as if waiting for the next move. She knew she couldn't afford to slip up. Every action needed to be meticulously calculated. "It's all right, big guy," she murmured, her voice calm, trying to convey trust to the animal. She knew the hospital was in chaos outside, but inside, in that moment, the connection she had established with the lion was the key to keeping everyone safe. Looking closer, Laura noticed that the lion had small cuts across his body, signs of extreme fatigue and perhaps of a long journey. Even so, he remained protective, especially over the cub. His breathing was heavy, but not aggressive. She took a deep breath, realizing she couldn't leave him without care. She needed to act quickly, but any sudden move could shatter the fragile peace. So she made a decision. "I'm going to help you both. But you need to trust me," she said, maintaining her calm tone. The lion, as if understanding, let out a soft sigh, and for the first time, lay completely down on the floor. It was a gesture of surrender, a demonstration of trust that even surprised Laura. She knew he was at the limit of his strength. With the cub still in her arms, she began to examine the lion's wounds with her eyes, noticing the severity of the situation. Her options were limited. She didn't have all the necessary medical supplies, but that wouldn't stop her from trying. "We're going to get through this," she whispered to herself, more as a promise than a fact. Carefully, she placed the cub in an improvised blanket and started searching for what she had available: a first aid kit, some bandages, and water. Returning to the lion's side, she began cleaning the superficial cuts, always keeping an eye on his reactions. Every touch was gentle, respectful, almost like a silent request for permission. The lion didn't react with fear or aggression. On the contrary, he remained quiet, exhausted, as if he finally knew he was safe there, under Isabela's care. The silence in the room was almost tangible. Outside, the chaos continued, but inside, time seemed to have stopped. Laura, still bent over the lion, cleaned his wounds with the little water and gauze she had on hand. Her movements were meticulous and gentle, but the tension in the air remained. Any mistake could be fatal. The lion, now lying down, watched every gesture with heavy, exhausted but alert eyes. His muscles were still tense, as if he could leap at any moment at the first sign of danger. His breathing was strong but uneven, and Laura knew that while he was accepting her help, the line between trust and animal instinct was thin. She finished cleaning the last cut and began bandaging one of his injured paws. At that moment, the cub let out a sharp whimper, making the lion abruptly lift his head. His eyes narrowed, and he let out a low growl, a warning to Laura. Her heart raced, but she stayed calm, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger a dangerous reaction. Still crouched, she spoke in the softest voice she could manage. "Easy. I know you're worried about the cub, but I'm here to help. I won't hurt him, I promise." The lion kept his eyes on her, muscles taut, while the cub continued trembling in the blanket beside them. The air in the room grew heavy, and for a few seconds, it seemed like the entire hospital was suspended in that moment of tension. Laura knew she was at a crossroads. If the lion decided she was a threat, everything could fall apart. But she also felt that the inexplicable connection between them still existed, hanging by a thread. Taking a deep breath, she stepped back, slowly moving away from the lion to show she wasn't a danger. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. The lion relaxed a little, though his eyes still reflected a mix of vigilance and exhaustion. "It's all right. You've done a great job taking care of him so far. Now it's my turn," she said, trying to sound reassuring. After a few seconds of suffocating tension, the lion lowered his head to the floor again, letting out a long, heavy sigh. It was as if he had finally surrendered, fully accepting Isabela's help. The moment of greatest tension had passed, but Laura knew the night was far from over. Laura understood she didn't have much time. The lion was exhausted, and though he had accepted her help, his injuries were more severe than she had initially thought. Furthermore, the cub seemed fragile, with short, irregular breaths. She needed a safer place, with better conditions to treat them. "It's all right. You've done a great job taking care of him so far. Now it's my turn," she said, trying to sound reassuring. After a few seconds of suffocating tension, the lion lowered his head to the floor again, letting out a long, heavy sigh. It was as if he had finally surrendered, fully accepting Isabela's help. The moment of greatest tension had passed, but Laura knew the night was far from over. Laura understood she didn't have much time. The lion was exhausted, and though he had accepted her help, his injuries were more severe than she had initially thought. Furthermore, the cub seemed fragile, with short, irregular breaths. She needed a safer place, with better conditions to treat them. Looking around, she noticed a small, empty supply room next to the ward they were in. Without wasting time, Laura made a subtle gesture to the lion, indicating for him to follow. With slight hesitation, he slowly got up, his muscles tense from pain and exhaustion. With the cub carefully in her arms, she guided them to the room. "Come on. I know you're tired, but I need to take care of both of you," murmured Laura, her voice still calm and soft. As she entered the small room, she locked the door, creating a safe space isolated from the chaos still dominating the hospital. Outside, the sounds of sirens and orders echoed through the hallways, but in that space, Laura could focus on what really mattered, saving the lion and the cub. She quickly improvised a treatment area with what she had available, a simple stretcher for the cub and a towel laid out on the floor for the lion. Her hands worked quickly, preparing gauze, antiseptics, and clean water. Laura knew she didn't have the necessary equipment to fully treat the lion, but she would do what she could. The lion, though extremely tired, watched her every movement with attentive eyes. There was no longer any aggression in his gaze, only a silent trust that surprised Isabela. He was placing his life in her hands, something she never thought possible when dealing with a beast like him. She began to treat the lion's deeper cuts, cleaning and covering the wounds with the limited supplies she had. At the same time, she kept the cub close, trying to stabilize it with water and warmth. The little creature was still trembling, but it seemed less frightened by Laura's care. As she worked, a doubt began to grow in her mind. How had that lion ended up in the hospital? And why was he so protective of the cub? Something didn't add up. But at that moment, Laura had other priorities. "You're doing well. Just a little more," she whispered as she finished bandaging the lion. He let out a low growl, but not one of pain. It was almost like a silent thank you. Exhausted, Laura allowed herself a small sigh of relief. For now, the two were safe, and the lion, once an imminent threat, now seemed more vulnerable than ever. She sat for a moment, observing the lion and the cub. One thing was clear. This night was far from being just a coincidence. At this point, Laura improvises an emergency room and continues to care for the lion and cub, while starting to reflect on the mystery surrounding the situation. Did you like the development? We can move on to the next part whenever you're ready. As Laura finished tending to the lion and cub, the sounds outside the room grew louder. Rushed footsteps echoed in the hallways, and agitated voices were heard discussing what was happening. She knew that sooner or later, the authorities would arrive to try and control the situation. What she didn't know was whether they would understand that the lion wasn't a threat. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door made Laura jump. It was Eduardo, the head of security, accompanied by a team of veterinarians and specialists. Their voices were muffled by the sound of the door, but Laura could hear the urgency in their discussion. "Laura, are you okay?" shouted Eduardo, anxious. "We brought specialists. They can help." Laura slowly got up and cautiously unlocked the door, opening it just enough for Eduardo to see the situation inside the room. He looked, incredulous, at the lion lying on the floor and the cub in Laura's arms. The lion was visibly exhausted, and though his eyes were still alert, he showed no signs of aggression. "You need to be careful," warned Isabela firmly. "He's injured, but he's not a threat. He brought the cub here. We can't treat him like just any wild animal." The veterinarians exchanged confused looks, while the head of the group, an older man named Dr. Almeida, stepped forward. He observed the scene with clinical eyes, but there was something in the way he looked at the lion that indicated respect. "I understand what you're saying, Laura," Dr. Almeida responded calmly. "But we still need to transport him. He needs more specialized care, and we don't know what brought him here." Laura knew the lion needed advanced care, but she also knew the situation was delicate. They couldn't just sedate him and take him like they would with any other animal. Something deeper was happening, and she sensed the lion knew it too. "We're going to need your help," Dr. Almeida continued, looking directly at Laura. "He trusts you. If we try to approach without you, he might react badly. Are you willing to help with this?" She looked at the lion, who was looking back at her, with eyes that now seemed less wild and more human. She felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but knew she couldn't abandon him now. "I'll help," she said firmly, "but only if you do this calmly. No sedatives unless absolutely necessary. Let's treat him with the respect he deserves." Dr. Almeida nodded, and the team began to prepare an improvised stretcher, while Laura, always beside the lion, tried to keep him calm. The cub, now a bit more stable, was carefully placed in a small transport box. The arrival of the team brought relief, but also raised many questions. The lion was there with a purpose. Laura was sure of that, and the next steps would be crucial to understanding what was really going on. With the lion and cub now under the care of the veterinarians, Laura finally had a moment to reflect. The lion seemed calm, almost as if he knew he was safe. Dr. Almeida, intrigued, began to examine the cub more closely. "This isn't an ordinary cub," he said, frowning. "I've never seen a creature like this." "I'll help," she said firmly, "but only if you do this calmly. No sedatives unless absolutely necessary. Let's treat him with the respect he deserves." Dr. Almeida nodded, and the team began to prepare an improvised stretcher, while Laura, always beside the lion, tried to keep him calm. The cub, now a bit more stable, was carefully placed in a small transport box. The arrival of the team brought relief, but also raised many questions. The lion was there with a purpose. Laura was sure of that, and the next steps would be crucial to understanding what was really going on. With the lion and cub now under the care of the veterinarians, Laura finally had a moment to reflect. The lion seemed calm, almost as if he knew he was safe. Dr. Almeida, intrigued, began to examine the cub more closely. "This isn't an ordinary cub," he said, frowning. "I've never seen a creature like this." A chill ran down Isabela's spine. There was something unusual, not just about the cub, but about the entire situation. The hospital, the lion, the way he seemed driven by a purpose. Everything indicated that something bigger was at play, something beyond the natural. As they talked, an idea began to form in Laura's mind. The lion was trying to protect the cub from something or someone. But what? Or who? With the dawn, the natural light illuminated the hospital. The team was preparing to transport the lion and cub to a safer location. But Isabela couldn't shake the feeling that this story was far from over. Before they left, the lion, now stronger, looked directly into Laura's eyes. There was no fear, only a deep connection, as if he trusted her to continue what had been started. "This isn't over, is it?" Laura murmured. The lion, as if understanding, let out a soft growl of farewell. And in that moment, Laura knew her life would never be the same. After the lion and cub were taken to the sanctuary, the specialists finally discovered the truth. The cub was from a rare and endangered species, a mix of wild feline with lynx-like characteristics. The lion, who had cared for it, seemed to have taken on the role of protector after the cub was separated from its mother under mysterious circumstances. With proper care, both recovered well. The lion was transferred to a nature reserve where he could live in peace, while the cub was sent to a specialized conservation program. Relieved, Laura felt she had fulfilled her role. The resolution brought peace to the hospital, and her own life moved forward, transformed. She knew that, in a way, she had helped save not just 2 lives, but had also contributed to the preservation of a unique species. Now, with a feeling of gratitude, Laura moved on, certain that the lion and the cub were safe and that their unlikely encounter had been a success.